What is the greatest game of all time is a question that could have 1,000 answers, but roll back the calendar to the early 2000s and there was only really one. Ocarina of Time, or occasionally Final Fantasy VII, was the game, the best game of all time. This fact was echoed in countless best game ever lists from this period, and was certainly the expected end segment for any top 10s of N64 or Zelda games. And in the year 2021, after the hyper craze, the Ocarina is overrated backlash, and psych it's good actually counter backlash, all of this leaves us with the question, why? Why did this goofy, clunky game, of which the discourse at the time mostly centered on complaining about Navi and the Water Temple, resonate so strongly within the early internet?
And I'm not coming at this phenomenon from an outsider's perspective. I first played the game when the 3DS remake released, and it's been one of my favourite games since then.
Despite its age and observable flaws, something at the heart of this game, its world and the story it tells, just works. And I'd like to try and dissect that, to argue that this game is, and always was, a masterpiece. Oh, and very wide-reaching spoilers ahead, so if you haven't played Ocarina of Time, go do that. Some people think it's pretty good, I hear. Part 1. The Illusion of Scale. Looking at map-size comparisons of Zelda games, such as those that were all the rage around Breath of the Wild's release, it's striking just how small Ocarina's Hyrule is, especially considering its reputation as this grand, epic adventure. And while the discourse around this is generally split between sneering at the pathetic garbage 90s gamers thought was impressive, or appreciating what it managed to do despite the technology that was available, I'd like to take the third option.
Not only is Ocarina of Time's tiny game world good as hell, and facilitates a level of player-game intimacy a larger open world wouldn't allow, but the fact it's specifically so much smaller than people remember it is a tremendous accomplishment of well-executed game design.
Most of the heavy lifting establishing scale is done within the first couple of hours. Ocarina of Time starts you off in a small but dense and energetic enclosed space, the Kokiri Forest, where this version of Link grew up and had never left before the events of the game. You can explore the multi-layered environment, meet childhood friends, and learn the basic controls and mechanics, completing your first main objective: to find a sword and gather money to buy a shield so that the Kokiri bully Mido will let you pass and meet the Great Deku Tree. From here, you're sent into your first dungeon, another tightly packed small space where progression is mostly vertical to show off the new 3D engine, and creating a simple puzzle where Link's falling momentum needs to be used to access lower areas to encourage players to think in 3 dimensions. After clearing this challenge, the game really begins. The Deku Tree tells of your destiny, your origin, sets up the primary conflict of the game, and sets you off into the overworld to find Zelda in Hyrule Castle before promptly dying. F's in the chat. From here, the game tasks you for the first and only time with walking from one end to the other of Hyrule Field, the emptiest and by far the largest single area of the game.
I think it's this 1-2 punch of opening with dense but manageable areas before setting you off on a quest that requires just walking to take in your environments and maybe dip in to start a side quest or two, that establishes why this world feels so big.
Your first voyage into the main world is mostly used as a narrative device to establish a mood and set up the tone of the rest of your adventure, rather than being a singular chunk of gameplay as it's sometimes criticized as. Instead, by imprinting this idea of grand epic scale before launching you back into the crowded town and dungeon areas you spend most of your time in, the game cements an illusion of scale that narrative and character interactions hinge on to make everything feel more important and meaningful. This is probably why footage of Link exploring Hyrule Field is used at the title screen. It evokes the mood of your adventure far more than it actually shows what you'll be doing. You don't even spend much time in Hyrule Field throughout the game. Almost all periods of travel after this point can be circumvented by various shortcuts, ocarina warps, riding Epona, or just your objectives during the Young Link phase only prompting travel between adjacent exits from the main hub. This subtle deception, where an area the size of a large inner-city park becomes an epic fantasy universe, is then codified by an attempt to make its world as cohesive and holistic as possible, including at points where it doesn't make literal sense to do so. For instance, there are only a few dozen interactable NPCs in the game, which in reality would be best understood as like couple of small tribes. But the effort made to establish these as 5 fantasy peoples, the Kokiri, Hylians, Gorons, Ruto, and Gerudo, with their own unique culture, architecture, fashion, and even systems of governance, adds a lot of emotional stakes to your journey, further building this sense of scale. Efforts at world building to have the isolated fragments of gameplay click together as a unified unified single space go a long way too, such as how many of the residents of Castletown move to the nearby Kakariko village once Ganondorf takes over, and how almost all the water in the game is connected. Starting with its source at Zora's Fountain by the Ice Cavern, the game's one river passes through Zora's Domain, Zora's River, around Hyrule Field, going under the drawbridge outside Castletown, expands into the larger river dividing Gerudo Valley before ending at Lake Hylia, which connects to a small side area where the fishing minigame takes place.
And while it would be easy to write this off as simply making the most of limited hardware, and maybe that's all this was intended as, I think the reduced size of Ocarina's universe does genuinely add to the intimacy and personal nature of the experience.
It means that over the course of a 40-hour campaign including side quests, you were able to familiarize yourself with a pretty sizable portion of the cast and embed yourself thoroughly into the 5 civilizations. When characters pop up again and are recontextualized in the future version of Hyrule after the 7-year time skip, there's a decent chance you've met before and would remember them, which makes the late game that bit more engaging, especially with one specific group we'll get into later. Rather than conflict with each other, this game's idea of scale, and fact it is in reality just an idea, both complement each other and the experience, lending a grandiosity to your actions while retaining an organic sense of emotional attachment to enough of the world that you start to feel like a part of it. And it's that emotional attachment that leads us on to Part 2. A world worth saving. The motivation of being the hero and saving the day is kind of taken for granted in most fantasy games. You be the hero, and that be what heroes do. But in addition to the world of Ocarina being an intimate yet illustrious world of great importance, the efforts made to bond the player emotionally to the land of Hyrule further compounds the satisfaction gained from continuing the journey and opposing the evil threatening the land. The role of heroism is at first just foisted upon Link, but becomes what he as a character wants to do, and what the player behind him wants to see through to the end as well. A lot of this is achieved through the ocarina itself. Music is a powerful method of tying emotion to a specific place or event, and so having the player learn specific melodies of the game's good-as-hell soundtrack on the ocarina to activate different events is an interesting means of having these tracks sink into your subconscious. The feeling of meeting Zelda is brought back each time Zelda's lullaby is played to activate some switch, and the charm of befriending the young Epona is reprised each time you summon her as an adult. Ditto with the memories of the Temple of Time, bonding with Saria, and the sun rising each morning. These small musical refrains force you to take in the details, and it's a quaint mechanic that bonds you to the world. Secondly, the game is just very weird in a super charming way. How characters move and talk and interact with one another and with you has the playful qualities of a children's cartoon, and it's hard not to love. You just kinda wanna go out of your way to see what even the most unimportant NPCs are up to, because the writing and animations are that magnetically appealing. You've got Darunia's iconic dance moves upon hearing Saria's song for the first time, or the Zora King's slow shuffle to get out of your way because it's not like he's got anything better to do. There are just cows in holes in the ground for some reason. You can play a song by them and get free milk. It's a good thing. I love the bean seller outside Zora's River who slowly inflates the prices of the magic beans the more you buy, justifying the price adjustment like he's responding to a huge swelling demand, teaching kids from an early age about the evils of the free market. See also those goddamn Deku scrubs who attack you, get defeated, and throw an absolute Hail Mary attempting to sell you whatever they're hiding, and then leave. The sheer gall of it. This is one aspect that was probably done better in future games, however, as the weirdness of the cast became increasingly accentuated. Carpet hippie floated, so Tingle could soar. Regardless, it is part of Zelda's DNA, introduced in Link's Awakening, but first properly integrated here, that makes these worlds and stories so much more fun to experience. On a more superficial level as well, the world warrants protecting because the game just looks good. Oh, the models and textures have aged, sure, but the effort put into dynamic camera angles, the framing of big moments and important buildings, as well as some genuinely decent cinematography and shot composition within the later cutscenes, really helps you connect on an emotional level with the characters and the nature of the world fallen out of balance when Ganondorf takes over, particularly in the moments around discovering the time skip. Much like your first foray into Hyrule Hyrule Field, the experience of realizing you failed to stop Ganondorf's coup and discovering the once lively castle town has been transformed into this dismal ruin populated by redeads, is a charged moment that imprints on each player, making me at least even more determined to push forward and successfully save the day. The aesthetic and charm force empathy for the world you explore, such that seeing it in disrepair feels like a problem you're invested in solving.
The primary means of emotionally integrating the player within the game world, however, is the sages you are tasked with awakening throughout the second act of the game.
Mechanically, this idea is very similar to that of the maidens from A Link to the Past, where you spend the latter half of the game acquiring this menagerie of nameless women to something break the seal and win the game. But it's hard to genuinely empathize with someone you only meet as a plot device, and harder still to believe their personhood is even related to the world as a whole or the consequences of events in the game if their being a plot device is literally all you see them do. The 5 sages attached to the 5 temples are a different beast entirely. You meet all of them previously multiple times. Mostly they're introduced in the first few hours of the game. One of them is the first character other than Navi you speak to, and one of them is Darunia, the guy who dances to the song you play before the second dungeon.
See, it's all connected. Synergy. That's not what synergy means.
The fact that their status as an important tie to the spiritual elements of the world is not revealed to Link or them until well after you meet means that the character dynamics between each sage and Link comes across as much more organic. Plus, their becoming sages in the final moments you see them is just a neat ribbon on top to finalize their respective character arcs, such as Saria's tearful farewell or at last gaining Noburu's respect, and tie the completion of said arc more directly to gameplay progression. You spend the first half of the game learning to care about these side characters, and then that attachment becomes weaponized in the latter half to become a meaningful, motivating thrust pushing you onwards in the story. Ocarina of Time's environment design, character interactions, and world building, and how those 3 elements change after the time skip, establish saving the world as something you, the player, want to do, which is a major piece of why progression and completion of the story comes across as so satisfying. Link, the character, is so called for representing a link between the worlds of each game and the player. It just took until the series' 5th outing for this motivational connection to be perfected. Part 3. The power of agency. See, I was doing a Triforce thing the whole time, you didn't even know. The first point about the world being small was wisdom, and the second one was courage, sure, why not?
For the most part, the Legend of Zelda games, Ocarina of Time more literally than most, are about growing up, with the fantasy trappings and good versus evil framing simply to tie these emotions to the mechanics of a game world. The facts of Ocarina's warm, intimate Hyrule despite conceptual grandeur, and its fun, lively and captivating world design connecting player motivations with that of the Avatar protagonist are important. But at its core, this is a game about what it means to claim and exercise agency, fulfilling your destiny to become the person you want to be in a world that seeks to deny that from you. That, to me, is the core of Ocarina of Time's appeal, and what cements it as a masterpiece.
Within combat, this theme is realized by granting you an elaborate and versatile moveset that in most encounters is heavily restricted by the enemies you come up against. And it's only over the course of the whole game do these restrictions melt away to allow you to slowly claim a meaningful control over your environment. There is almost always an obvious ideal solution to each encounter, and while item upgrades sometimes change what that ideal strategy is, unless unveiling a new enemy type, you won't find many surprises in how you dispatch enemies. With these restrictions, and how the game design can condition specific styles and evolution of styles of play over time, it allows the story of Link growing up and claiming his agency to be felt more deeply by the player. Ignoring smaller enemies that mostly serve as environmental detail, like Keese and Torch Slugs, enemies that serve more thematic roles, like Redeads and Pose, and gimmick encounters that serve to engender specific moods in the dungeons they inhabit, like Floor Masters and, Door That Falls Down. I looked it up, that's what it's called. You can see a pretty clear shifting trend emerge across the larger enemy encounters in the game. You start with interactions that need to be dealt with entirely responsively. In the first dungeon, you meet Deku Scrubs and Skulltulas that can't be attacked at first, where attacking them actually delays the fight because it triggers their defensive states. You're forced to wait for an opening and exploit it, entering each encounter more as an observer than active participant. From there, you you start to come across more involved fights like Lizalfos, Wolfos, and Stalfos battles. These allow you more opportunities to attack and decisions for how to capitalize off each opening, but are still largely responsive as they only grant set windows where you are able to attack. Later still, you have battles with critters like Gibdos, Dead Hands, and you can also include Flare Dancers here, where you have much more control over the pace of the fight, and while there are parts you can't manipulate, they're not totally under the control of your adversary either. And finally, we have the Spirit Temple, where you meet the Anubis, a new type of foe that acts entirely responsively to Link's movement and must be manipulated into a trap, and the Iron Knuckles, the first duel-like encounter where the player can exercise complete agency.
I think combat strategy being this heavy-handed is why Ocarina gets a bad rep in a lot of places, especially compared to games like Wind Waker or Breath of the Wild that grant far more player freedom in each interaction.
But the mistake this makes, I feel, is trying to analyze the gameplay piecemeal, when it was always intended as a collection of flashpoints to convey a journey across dozens of hours. Being granted a full arsenal of tools to fuck around with in each fight seems more engaging when you start the game up, but in reality this freedom comes at a cost. When you give the player total control over their playstyle and combat methods from the get-go, you can no longer tie the experience generated from combat gameplay with an emotional through line nearly as effectively. And something like the divinely, euphorically liberating showdown with the Iron Knuckle, a point in the game where the culmination of Link's growth and newly earned agency is represented by the total unshackling of the mechanical limitations the game has gotten you used to at this point, becomes impossible to accomplish. I love this moment so much. You get so accustomed to acting reactively over the larger foes that this one juicy moment where your innate mastery over the timings for striking, sidestepping, and backflips can be exercised is utterly cathartic. And like your first foray into Hyrule Field and the discovery of the destroyed castle town, is a powerful imprinting memory that frames the narrative beats of the game in line with the emotional journey of each player. The argument made by the game's critics is that players so easily recognize the Iron Knuckles fight standing out as good design is just further proof the rest of the combat is so undercooked, because it highlights the missed potential. But it doesn't simply stand out. The Iron Knuckle stands as the final data point in a line of progression that began in the very first dungeon, and the aspects that make this fight especially satisfying mean more because of how long they were taken away from the player, both because of the contrast of freeform combat after getting used to the more responsive style, and experiencing said contrast when you're already good enough at the game to fully enjoy it, is always going to feel better in that moment than simply being given those mechanics at the start. The combat and progression thereof is engaging not because of the options you access in each instant of gameplay, but for how these instances fit into the larger narrative of growing up, becoming the hero, proving your worth, and having that proof reflected back at you in how the game allows you to interact with its world. Its gameplay success is honestly a testament to the strengths of extremely linear design, although that's not a super trendy thing to praise in a video game at this point. Ocarina of Time is a story about becoming a hero, not simply being one, and that's why handling combat like this works. Growing agency as you progress through the game is echoed in the story and world design too. In the past, you are constantly condescended to and infantilized, called kid, child, Mr. Hero even, by almost everyone you meet. Despite your great destiny, something the player is told very early on by the Great Deku Tree and is then reinforced when meeting Zelda for the first time, the respect of those around you is not freely given and takes a while to earn. It's a bitterly relatable feeling to how I think most of us remember childhood, this period of not being treated like a full person capable of making decisions, and it's further cemented by the world you explore. I think it's notable, for instance, that all 3 of the dungeons you complete before taking the Master Sword see Link enter the body of some gargantuan creature. The first and third dungeons are set entirely inside of the sentient Great Deku Tree and Lord Jabu Jabu respectively, and the main room of Dodongo's cavern is built under what seems to be a giant ribcage of some long-dead beast, with the final third of the dungeon seeing you open and enter into the mouth of a towering ancient Dodongo skull. In both story and dungeon design, the thematic through-line is to remind you of Link's insignificance. But still, you persevere, and that perseverance is rewarded in the way the game frames Link shifting as the game goes on. Later dungeons, the temples, often involve Link's deliberate manipulation of their states and environments. Twisting corridors, raising water levels, riding the ghost boat, it's all great. And it's very appropriate the the first item you get after reaching the future is the hookshot, a tool which recontextualizes the first-person mode from a view to observe obstacles and enemies to be taken out so they can't hurt you, to a view of surveying opportunities of places to reach to obtain greater mastery over the surrounding area. But establishing agency by this alone would be fairly baseless. Heroism isn't simply power, it's power exercised to do good, and that's where the reinforcement of the knock-on effects of Link's actions comes in, principally through how your actions as young Link echo into the lasting impacts of the nature of future Hyrule. This is the masterstroke of splitting the game's world into two periods of time. The medium-term consequences of your actions can now actually be witnessed. Unpleasant characters in the past, like the Kokiri bully Mido, can be shown to have genuinely grown and matured from their experience of knowing you, even expressing remorse for their actions. Bonding with the baby horse Epona by learning her favourite song is a cute moment early on, but it gains significance when that bond and that song becomes what allows you to liberate her from the ranch's cruel owner in the future, allowing you access to ride Epona for the rest of the game. But my absolute favourite moment has to be when you re-enter Goron City for the first time as an adult. You find the area empty, apart from a single small Goron rolling around who, when you stop him, announces, "I am Link, hero of the Gorons. Hear my name and tremble." There are a lot of ways to show an impact over a world, but I don't think I've ever played something to showcase in 2 lines of dialogue something as gratifying as learning your actions in the second dungeon were so meaningful to one character, he named his son after you. And the legacy of the Dodongo Buster and how it was remembered in the culture you saved can be felt in the sheer pride Goron Link talks about his name.
And like with the steady acquisition of agency throughout the game, the theme of knock-on effects in the story runs parallel to gameplay.
Ocarina of Time was the first Zelda to introduce the concept of puzzle box dungeons, where switches throughout can impact the shape and form of part of or the entire dungeon, which needs to be manipulated to solve puzzles, such as hitting stone pillars in higher areas to create platforms down below, or altering water height to move platforms and allow item use at different points, or attacking tentacles in one area to remove them from another. These dovetailing thematic threads, the growth of agency on one hand and showcasing the positive consequences of that agency on the other, perfectly complement and build upon each other, to create a game where you're constantly growing and that growth constantly has rising stakes. While in both the first and second acts from very early on, your main goal is ultimately to collect trinkets to stop Ganondorf, the fact that's never all you're doing is essential to why the game is compelling. The quest for magic jewelry on the orders of a giant tree is the same as the one to save a race of rock people from a bloodthirsty dragon, or to help a diligent security guard find a gift for his kid, and the context provided to every part of the main story aids in this world being an interconnected community of people you're interacting with, rather than a series of distractions for a story that's going on above them. Given how much Link's and the player's heroism is set up and reinforced, the completion of the game is best understood as an extension of the goodness, hope, and stability you provide to this world, which makes that finale all the more engaging and satisfying. Bringing me to Part 4, the finale. I've gone through the structures and design principles that I believe make Ocarina of Time work and make its mostly competent but unremarkable gameplay and combat come across as so uniquely satisfying, but we can't assume these general trends are all that matters.
If the game's goodness is centered on the narrative, the final hours and climax become paramount, and in a video explaining the phenomenon of Ocarina of Time, it would be a mistake to overlook just how much this game sticks the landing.
After collecting the final of the 6 medallions, you're guided back to the Temple of Time, where it's revealed the mystical spirit guide Sheik was actually Zelda the whole time. Which, having played Smash Bros. Melee for a decade, I did not know was supposed to be a twist, but apparently this was a big deal. Having dropped her disguise, she's instantly kidnapped, building stakes for your final confrontation in the now accessible Ganon's Castle, fittingly located where Hyrule Castle stood in the past, which was the first location you were sent to after leaving the Kokiri village, and it was home to the most deliberately childish segment of the game. The body of Ganon's Castle faces you with puzzle, combat, and navigational challenges in various recreations of the Adult Link dungeons, and after all have been completed, you make your way up the tower. Here you face flaws of previous mini-bosses, which with your full arsenal can be fairly quickly dispatched. Lizalfos, Stelfos, my 2 metal sons, the gang's all here, and all the while you're walking up a red carpet laid out before your showdown as a dramatic rendition of Ganondorf's theme, a track which up to this point had been reserved for only the most tense cutscenes slowly builds louder and louder the further up you climb, before the final hallway, stained glass windows lighting your path. The backing track swells and you push through the doors to reveal the theme of the main villain you heard was being played diegetically by the main antagonist on a giant organ in the last room of the game. I love it. This is how every game should end. I don't care about tone or genre, this is what peak game design looks like. I love Ganondorf's characterization in this game too. He's flamboyant in a way that fits the often goofy cast of this game's interpretation of Hyrule, while never sacrificing the magnetism and authority that makes him a believable villain. So with the stage set, battle begins, and the gameplay loop of agency being taken away then restored is repeated one final time. The first phase is entirely responsive. You even get Navi's lock-on ability disabled and are forced to simply run away from some of Ganondorf's attacks. The only window for damaging him comes at the end of a round of energy lightsword tennis, which itself is a throwback to the strategy against Phantom Ganon around the midpoint of the game. But after he's defeated once and you think the game's over, the King of Thieves revives and mutates into the monstrous form of Beast Ganon. If the Iron Knuckles are the synthesis of the character arc told through standard combat gameplay, this fight is that same culmination of combat against the bosses. It's not an easy fight. Ganon moves quickly and deals hefty damage with each blow, but it is liberating. You're free to approach any way you choose, from going around, under his legs, or attacking from a distance, and you can use any tool in your arsenal to stun, distract, or just pummel the beast with all of your pent-up rage. The 3DS remake improves a lot of elements of the whole game, and is in almost every way the superior version. Hell, I recommend it exclusively for how much it fixes the water temple alone, but here is the one element it really shat the bed. Ganon looks so goofy and colourful now, and the fact his character textures are constantly visible really robs the moment of the drama present in the original, where the darkened battlefield, lit up only by flashes of lightning, the reflection of Ganon's swords and his spectral eyes further solidifies the finality and dense atmosphere of these final moments, before delivering the final blow, defeating the beast, beating the game, and saving the world.
Making videos like this that argue thing good or thing bad, I feel the need to slightly simplify the concepts within a property. I believe what I've said is generally true for how the game operates, but there are of course points it fucks things up. But the finale, specifically the climb up Ganon's tower to the end credits, stands out just for getting everything right.
It's this perfect moment that just leaves you in awe, staring at the credits and thinking, I did this. You see the entire cast celebrating, and even the 6 sages just vibing together, reminding you that the world is a brighter place and you were the one that made the change. Without sounding overly cliche, it makes you feel like a hero. And that is a powerful memory that no matter how many video games you play through after, will always shine strong.
Ocarina of Time was never a perfect game, and in the 2 decades of critics responding to its unparalleled reputation, some of the complaints brought up have even been not shit.
But what it lacks in polish or consistency, it more than makes up for in its unprecedented ambition and heaps of incredibly well-constructed design, from its world, to its characters, to its dungeons, to its enemies. Its world invites as it impresses, and its story brings the player in line with the protagonist, such that the gameplay and thematic arcs of growth and usage of an ability to make the world better feel all the sweeter, with a stunning conclusion that leaves an impression to last a lifetime. This game's absurd critical acclaim might have been overwhelming, but it was never an accident. And I hope in this video I've gone some way to accounting for why it happened. Because Zelda's graphics might age, but good game design is Ocarina of Timeless. Christ, did I seriously just say that?
Thank you for watching my video. I made it myself. Hope you like the new poster setup too. The old blue wall Mega Man centric backdrop served me well for 7 years, but there's a time in every person's life where they must stop exclusively filming at their parents' house and buy a goddamn poster frame. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.